Welcome to this lesson. So in this lesson we are going to be looking at our new game button. So we'll be creating the shadow that I showed you in the earlier lesson. So let's look at that now. So first of all, let's go to the button. Where is it? There you go. So first of all, let's align it properly. If you see here, it's kind of stuck to the canvas. So let's give it a small top margin. Okay, so a little bit of space like we have in our final output. So let's give it a small top margin. Okay, so in here the margin top is right now 15 pixels. Let's increase it to around 25 pixels so that there's enough space between both of our elements. Perfect. So that's done. So now let's work on the borders and the shadows. Our button already has a border right here, 1 pixel solid black border that's displayed in here. So let's give it a small border radius value so the edges don't look so sharp. They're very sharp in here, so it doesn't look very realistic. In the real world, things aren't so sharp, right? So let's give it a border radius to make it look more realistic. Border radius is 3 pixels. Perfect. So finally, let's get to the box shadow property. If you see in the final output in here, we have a shadow here in our new game button. This was achieved using the box shadow property of CSS3. It's a relatively new property of CSS. With this property, you can mention the color, size, spread, and the blur radius of your box shadow. The syntax of this property is as follows. So let me show you how the property works first before we apply it to our code. Alright, so this is how the syntax works. Box shadow. The first is H shadow, and then V shadow. I'll explain what all of these are in just a minute. Please bear with me. Then there's blur, then there's spread, and then finally RGBA, R value, G value, B value, and A value. And it ends with a semicolon. So this is how you give your box shadow property for any kind of box that you can create. So to start off, the H shadow value is the horizontal shadow. Okay, the horizontal shadow of our box. If you mention a positive value in this for this particular value, you'll get a shadow at the bottom of the box. If you mention a negative value in here, you'll get a shadow at the top of the box. And the size of the shadow increases based on the number that you give. Okay, so either the positive value or the negative value, depending on the number you give, the size of the shadow increases. Then there is vertical shadow, which is the V shadow in here. Just like the horizontal shadow, the positive value in here denotes that the shadow is at the right of the box, and negative value denotes that the shadow is at the left of the box. These two are compulsory values without which you can't create your shadow for your element. And as you know, Y positive, Y negative, as you know, realistically a shadow appears at the bottom and at the right. Right? At the top and the left, it's not realistic. So that's why those are negative values and the top and the right are positive values. Okay? So these two are compulsory values, and without these two values, you can't create a shadow for your element. Then there are optional values, which are the rest of the values. We'll only be using 3 of those optional values for our games. That's why I've only mentioned these 3. There are other values as well, apart from these 3 optional values. So the third optional value is the blur distance of the shadow. As the name implies, it blurs the shadow. Okay, so the shadow as you create, it'll be very sharp, it'll have the proper color, and this will blur it out. And the fourth value is the spread of the shadow, that is the size of the shadow. How far the shadow spreads from the element, it'll spread from the element. Okay, so how far the shadow can spread from the box or the element is mentioned in this value. You can also give negative values for this to change the direction of the spread. So it'll originally spread in here and here. If you change the direction, it'll spread in the opposite direction. Finally, there is the color of the shadow as the fifth value. And this is also optional. It's optional because the default value of a shadow is obviously black, because shadows are usually black. So if you don't give any values in here, black will be taken as the color by the browser. But in Safari browser, this value is compulsory. That's not the case for the other browsers though, so you can give any color you want in here in any format. So you can just give a color value in here like we've done here. Just give a color value, or you can give a hexadecimal value, or you can give a RGB value like that. But usually the commonly used format for box shadow is the RGBA format. This basically means red, the red value, the green value, blue value, and finally the opacity of the color. So it's red, blue, green, and finally the opacity of the shadow. So the RGB values can each go from 0 to 255. So this value can either be 0 or 255 or anything in between. 0 represents black and 255 is for white. Okay, so if you give 0 0 0 in here in all three values, then that means you're giving black color. If you give 255 255 255 in all three values, that means you're giving white color. Okay, and the opacity value, it can go from 0 to 1, where 0 means it's fully transparent, that is there is no color at all, that it's fully transparent, and 1 means it's completely opaque, that is the color is completely seen. And 0.5 is the commonly used opacity value since it gives the right kind of transparency for your shadow. So it's transparent. So 0.5 is actually transparent. So now that you know how the box shadow works, let's create one for our new game button. Our horizontal and vertical values are going to be, let me remove all of these. We don't need them. So our horizontal and vertical values are going to be 2 pixels each, 2 pixels for our horizontal and 2 pixels for our vertical shadow values. Since I don't want the shadow to be too big, then let's look at this. So it isn't visible right now. The only thing we can see here is the box radius. That's because we haven't finished this completely. Let's finish that. Then the blur distance is also going to be 2 pixels, but the spread value is going to be 1 pixel. 1 pixel. So the shadow stays close to our new game button. Finally, the color is going to be black, so the RGB values are going to be 0, 0, 0 each, and the opacity value is going to be 0.7, so that it's not completely opaque, but it has a degree of transparency. So it's slightly transparent. So now let's look at what we've got so far. Not bad. It's a decent looking shadow. So you can play around with all of these values or any of these 5 values and you can get different results, but I'm going to be sticking with these values. So I chose them arbitrarily. Okay, so I played around with the values and I chose these values so that I get this particular shadow. That is the shadow that I want. So you can give any values in here, you can play around with them and you can get your desired result. Okay, and before I end this lesson, I want to talk about prefixes. CSS3 is a relatively new styling format, and as such, many browsers don't support it yet. Therefore, it's better to make it compatible with all the browsers. We most probably don't need to do this because CSS3 compatibility is not as bad as it was a few years back when it was first introduced. But let's still do it to be on the safer side, alright? So we're going to be including prefixes to make the box shadow code compatible with our browser. So this is how it works. So moss, so first you have to give the value with this, and then you have to include prefixes. The first prefix is moss. So moss is for Mozilla browser. So this is for Mozilla Firefox. So that's for Mozilla Firefox, and then you just copy this and paste this. Okay, so usually the prefixes come above the actual property value so that these prefixes are run first. So later on this is run, or otherwise it'll run this and then there'll be an error. So that's why the prefixes should be placed before the actual property value. And then there's WebKit. WebKit is for, oh, sorry about that. Just going to copy this alone and paste it here. So WebKit is for Chrome and Safari browsers. Okay, and finally there's one for the Internet Explorer browser as well. So that is MS. Let's copy this and paste it in here. Alright, so these are our prefixes. So that ends the lesson. If you save this and if you look at our final output, everything looks exactly the same as this. So there is a border radius, there is a shadow, everything is stuck together, everything is where it has to be, and the design looks much better than how it looked before. It's not so bland anymore. Okay, so that's it for our lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.